G'day, how we going? So Starfield is out now in early access, and a review that a lot of people seemed kind of upset about if you were to look at the Starfield Reddit or even the Xbox subreddit is the review from Dan Stapleton at IGN, who gave the game a 7. And to be honest, I think the score makes sense, but I think there were a lot of things that were missed in his review and just not talked about at all that I wish was talked about at a much grander sort of scale. I think it needs to be something that's standard, or it should become standard in reviews, and that's the performance of a video game. Dan briefly touches on seeing some bugs in his game, and that's essentially it. Whereas something that was immediately noticeable for me when I booted in was even in the cave at the start of the game at 4K, FSR, I think I had resolution scale at 80%, all settings only on high. That cave area wasn't running very well. There were very noticeable FPS drops and it just didn't seem stable. So I ended up dropping it down to 75% resolution, or 70% it might have been. And then by the time I got to the first major city that you're supposed to go to for your main quest, New Atlantis, I could not hit 60 frames in the open hub area. So I ended up having to lower the settings to medium, the resolution scale to 50% with a 3080 and a 5800X 3D, and I was just sort of at 60 frames then. And look, the game looks good, the vistas look really nice, and the planets look really nice and everything, but the fact that I have to run the game at medium at 50% resolution scale to tickle 60 frames per second, the game does not look good enough to warrant that level of performance. And just today I booted up Metro Exodus out of curiosity, a game that I think still looks incredible, especially the enhanced edition because it has the improved ray tracing, and with no upscaling at all high, ray tracing high, hair works and everything, the game runs at about 60 to 70 odd frames a second, and with the very occasional dip to like 52 or something. And I know it's a different sort of game. Obviously, Starfield has lots of people walking around versus Metro's much more barren. But Metro looks the part of a game that's demanding resources. Starfield does not. And part of its performance, something I think should be spoken about, and I can't believe Bethesda have done this once again, but there is no FOV slider. How is that not a fucking talking point? How can they go from game to game for fucking decades now with people asking for an FOV slider and it's still not implemented? And the console command that you normally do, that doesn't work now either. So it is an easy fix, yes, but it's the principle, the fact that they're not launching with such a basic feature. And for people on console, they don't have the option to create an ini file to fix this, so they're stuck with the very zoomed in field of view. There's no HDR support, and for me personally, I can sort of take it or leave it. If there's no HDR, that's fine, it's not the end of the world. I'll play in standard. I don't have any problem with that. But something else they've done that is just stupid, the game doesn't work on OLEDs properly. They've, I don't know, put a filter onto the game, or maybe they've just upped the brightness for their darker colors or something. I was wondering why darker areas weren't really looking normal. Like it looked very washed out, like there was a gray filter put on everything. And then I find out that, yeah, people are having the same issues. It wasn't just me. There wasn't any settings that I had done, and people are trying to create reshades to fix this so that the blacks actually look like blacks on an OLED. And I think that needs to be pointed out because it's just so Bethesda to do something like that. Like, if you've never used an OLED before or are curious about how colors work on them, nothing needs to be set from a game or a movie. So this shirt of mine that I'm wearing is black. I don't have to do anything in the video editing for it to look true black on an OLED. The screen just does it itself because this is black, it's black on the OLED, that's it. Nothing happens. So the fact that Bethesda has tinkered with their coloring to the point that blacks don't work correctly on an OLED screen, that's ridiculous, right? Like, I feel like I'm going insane that more people aren't talking about that. It's not more widespread. I don't have a full review for the game or anything. I only played about 4 hours and then just went, nah, it's not for me. So I can see why the 7 out of 10 would make sense, but I just wish it was more common to highlight performance issues when they exist. Yes, sometimes they will talk about performance on a large scale when the game is catastrophically broken like it was for Cyberpunk, but I think it needs to be spoken about more heavily for Starfield, because sometimes you'll be in areas where like there's not really anything happening, there's just these random NPCs walking around. They don't even have routines or anything, they're just literally plopped in like GTA NPCs, and the game's just tanking. You're not doing anything, nothing's happening, and the game's just tanking really hard. That needs to be spoken about. It needs to be a standard that you talk about these blatant performance issues. And then there's other obvious things like the AI being garbage. I've run into that issue myself. I didn't really play long enough to have the same issues related to inventory management. And with the fast traveling between planets and everything, I personally don't think it's that much of an issue. I know people wanted these open explorations similar to No Man's Sky, but as someone who's a huge fan of Mass Effect, I didn't see an issue with not having free-form space travel. I think, if anything, Bethesda should have really lowered the scope down to a handful of planets and had open hub areas on each planet, like expand them a little bit and put a bit more depth into them, as opposed to the 1,000 planets and just bouncing between loading screens to fast travel because there's no freeform travel. I would have preferred to have seen something like that. But yeah, I don't really have anything else more to add to the discussion of Starfield. I just wanted to talk about the very obvious performance issues and highlight the fact that it should be spoken about more, especially Baldur's Gate 3. So we're coming off Baldur's Gate 3, and as I said in my video on that, excellent game, incredible game, but the Act 3 performance issues did not just exist for a handful of people. It existed for everyone. And I think it's kind of disingenuous that more reviewers weren't taking that into account for the score. They're giving it, you know, perfect 10s and everything. And meanwhile, Act 3 is just, or at the time was performing like absolute shit. Like, you know, frames dropping into the 20s and the 30s. And I think performance is something that is very easily measurable. People talk about objective ways to review video games. Performance can be measured objectively. And if a section of the game is performing terribly, it runs like fucking shit, that should be reflected. I imagine some reviewers probably personally feel like it's not too much of an impact on them, but in my opinion, it's something that should be taken into account for the score of the game and should be highlighted in the review. Like I said before, not just catastrophically bad experiences like Cyberpunk on release. So that's my ramble over. Until the next video, have a good one.